Our next speaker of the night is Savannah Mohacsi. Savannah is a graduate student here at the Frank H. Netter School of Medicine, and she regularly volunteers at the Connecticut Hospice. In her talk, Savannah will be talking about how her passion of art and her passion of medicine come together in a powerful way. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Savannah Mohacsi.
I was 3 hours into painting where my canvas was breathing beneath my hands. The canvas looked up at me and said, "You're like a makeup artist for the organs." I remember thinking to myself, that was the first time anyone could ever come close to describing what I actually do. Because when I tell people that I'm a body painter, this is what they imagine. And although this is fun and cute, at the heart of what I do goes much, much deeper. My canvases are living, breathing humans. Their skin textures change and vary. Sometimes they make sounds like gurgles or letting out a deep sigh. And sometimes, during a long body painting session, they fall asleep. My name is Savannah Mohacsi. I'm a medical student and an anatomical body painter. I dissect with my paintbrush, bringing to the surface what lives underneath. The bones, the muscles, the vessels, the nerves, the hidden architecture of the human being. Because our bodies tell stories of illness, injury, resilience, and survival. And to me, a makeup artist for the organs is someone who doesn't conceal what we see, but instead reveals what the body hides. I've been painting since 2019, but the most powerful moment out of all these times that I've painted, I realized is when the body painting is done. I walk the person that I've been painting right in front of a mirror. They take a moment, they look at themselves, as if they're seeing their body for the first time. On their face, I can see feelings of awe and gratitude. And I've had people even tell me, "I don't even want to wash this off." And moments like that have reaffirmed to me why I wanted to pursue medicine and have taught me the power of the intersection of art and medicine. But what I was doing wasn't just creating art. I was creating a clinical art practice, one that has taught me how to hold people's stories with compassion, empathy, and trust. But this clinical art practice didn't come from certainty. It came from me sitting with a lot of things I didn't quite understand. And it allowed me to really take the time to try and find myself. I want to take you to when I was an undergrad. I was pre-med, taking a lot of science classes, just checking those boxes. But the artist within me wasn't feeling nourished. At that time, I had a hard time even acknowledging that I was an artist, because when you're taking so many science classes, how do you make time and space for it? I was also the first in my family to go to college, which meant that I'm the first in my family to go to medical school. And so that meant that I didn't have a model for what this career would look like for me. So I had a lot of questions that I felt that I needed to answer before pursuing this path. How do you know that you're ready to be responsible for someone else's body and health? Will I be able to hold their grief without breaking underneath it? Would I be able to sit next to someone on their worst day and be fully present with them? How do you know that you're ready for that responsibility? And that was something that I struggled with. But for me, unconventionally, I found a lot of those answers with a paintbrush. And the first time that I could think back to when I first saw what that would look like, I was in my junior year of undergrad. I think I was on winter break. I went home and sat on the couch with my mom. We were watching this TV show called Skin Wars. And if you haven't heard of Skin Wars, it was a competition body painting show where these professional body painters were competing, creating these full body illusions. They were transforming models into something entirely different. I was enamored. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and my mind just kept going back and forth, thinking of different ideas, and I saw myself doing that. I had never body painted before. I don't know what I was thinking, but something deep in my heart was telling me that there was something there, and I realized that medicine and body painting, what the two of them have in common, is the body. And as I was looking at these body painting artists paint, I saw that they had to develop a connection and trust with the model that they were painting immediately, because those models were in a vulnerable state. Their skin was becoming a canvas, and so they had to develop that trust. The artists also had to think about how the person's anatomy would then work with their design. There was so much orchestration that was going on with this artistic practice. I wanted to try it, so I did. I proposed for my senior art thesis to use body painting as a means to simulate the patient-doctor relationship. I would interview people and ask them questions about their bodies and their health, and in turn paint their narrative on them. And so I got funding, which meant I actually had to do this. So, what mattered to me was that I got to know what it felt like to be painted on first before I painted on anyone else. I was in Northern California at the time, so I booked a body painting session with a professional body painter in San Francisco. I had 1 hour to use this time to research. This was my field work. So I asked so many questions. I asked this artist, well, what type of body painting do you use? Is it skin safe? How long does it last? Well, what do you do if somebody walks into your session and they are covered in body hair? How do you paint on them? Or how do you go about painting on somebody's body, especially in more vulnerable areas, more private areas, while being respectful and professional? These were important questions and were incredibly valuable and foundational for me to learn how to start this practice. So then I went on back to my dorm and I started practicing on myself. This is one of the first cases I did on my face. One side, muscles, the other, the skull. And I was just really learning how can I render this anatomy on myself. I would touch my face and really try to map it out on there. I then attempted illusions. I wanted to see if I could create a different perspective of the anatomy. Unfortunately, this does look gruesome, but for someone who's interested in medicine, this is valuable information to see what does it look like inside our arm. And then I started painting friends and classmates, and anyone who would lay on the floor of my dorm on blankets and towels. This was my makeshift clinic/art studio. It was such a humbling experience to start off this way. I learned so much. But what I was doing wasn't just learning how to paint. I was learning how to create an experience that made talking about the body comfortable. Because this topic at times is often taboo and uncomfortable for people. And that is what mattered to me, is that these people trusted me. So as I was getting on with this project, my goal was to turn this into an experience for patients. I wanted to bring this to a patient population. And just as I was trying to get there, COVID hit. It was spring of 2020, and we all know what happened at that time. I remember getting sent home, graduating virtually, and just like everyone else, not really knowing what came next. I stopped painting because by the nature of body painting, that requires closeness, and COVID prevented that. So I stopped. And I didn't realize how important my creative outlet was until it was gone. And just as things were starting to look up, came the beginning of 2021. My grandmother, whom I called Nana, was diagnosed with lymphoma. And just as we had caught her diagnosis, it was already too advanced. So my family and I had set her up with at-home hospice at the recommendation of her doctors. I became one of her caregivers and was there giving her medications hour after hour, and as I witnessed her start to degrade. I was there with her all the way until her lungs had stopped filling with air. That was one of the most difficult times in my life, being in my early 20s, having to care for my dying grandmother. But I am so proud of that moment looking back. When we finished, after she had passed, my family and I had gone through her house, cleaning it up, and I found a box. I remember looking at it thinking, what are these papers? Is it junk? And I found so much of my art. My Nana had kept my art from when I was creating scribbles when I was 2 years old, all the way until I was in high school, taking formal art classes. She had saw something in my art that I hadn't allowed myself to see. Not that I needed permission to be an artist, but it reaffirmed to me that my art, especially my body painting, wasn't meant to be a finite project. I was meant to continue building this into something greater. Something special, something that brought it to patience. And as time went on, a few months, I had a hard time managing my grief, holding it in my hands. Because every time that I would look down at my hands, I would be reminded of my Nana. I had inherited the same shape of hands as her, long, slender fingers, knobby knuckles. I remember when I was little, she would call her hands fly swatters, and I would tell her, stop it, there's fly swatter. I always thought her hands were beautiful, and I inherited them as well. And so, in order to manage my grief, I picked up my paintbrushes again with my hands. Inspired by an artwork, I saw it as an artwork, but a picture of her hands. This was a few weeks before she passed. And I painted them on my own. Studying the veins and the dark spots and the wrinkles, her and I were one. I call this piece Ode to My Nana's Hands. It's a two-part piece. On your left, you can see her hands up close. And on your right, you can see her hands over my heart, grasping at the necklace. And the necklace I was wearing had some of her ashes in them. And even though this paint had washed off, her memory and legacy was permanent. And as grief started to fade, that turned into inspiration. And inspiration led me to then be motivated to cold email any places in LA where I was living at the time where I would have access to patients. I emailed nonprofits, hospitals, care facilities. There was one organization that answered my email, and they were called the Institute for Arts and Medicine at USC's Norris Comprehensive Cancer Center. I showed them my art portfolio, all the people that I had painted previously, and they welcomed me with open arms. Eventually, I then led their division of visual arts as medicine, which meant that I managed a free art studio at the Cancer Center, where I would create arts programming for the cancer patients and the caregivers there. But I want you to see what they saw in me, all the artworks that I had created that led them to say yes. And it's important that I do because these were all people who have their own stories, and I want to honor them. First, I'd like to show you that this is a person who fractured their knee playing sports. And they didn't realize how important their independence was until it was gone. This is a person who grew up throughout their childhood with a chronic kidney condition that made them go in and out of children's hospitals as they were growing up. This is a person who lived their life for dance, and it caused a lot of strain and suffering in the way that they achieved perfection for the way that they moved their body. This is a person who's lived their life with scoliosis, and that even one small curve of the spine had rippling effects on their body. This is a person who had chronic gastrointestinal issues, and they felt like their insides were working against them. And this is a person who had lung issues since they were a child, and nobody believed them until they had to have surgery to correct it. These people, their stories, served as proof that my art had meaning, it had power. And now it helped me open the door to have the opportunity to be able to offer this offering to cancer patients. So I thank them. And when I started working in the cancer center, I'm studying it in the art studio, I remember this one patient who I will think of for the rest of my life. This patient walked in, who I will refer to as G. And G was coming in for her routine appointments with her oncologist, but she needed a break. She needed to come in and create art to distract herself from what she was dealing with. So I grabbed all the art supplies and was showing her the project that we were doing that day. I believe we were painting rocks. And G just had the biggest smile on her face, and she was telling me her story. She was 38 years old when she was diagnosed with colon cancer. The screening age for colon cancer is 45, so she was just under that. By the time it was caught by doctors, it had spread throughout her body. She eventually had to have parts of her liver removed, her sigmoid colon, her ovaries, and she even had metastases to her lungs. She had scars in every direction on her abdomen, a marker of every time that medicine had to open her up to keep her alive. Yet she had such an infectious sense of positivity, I can't even describe it in a way that does it justice. She was literally light in human form, even when the darkness of a cancer diagnosis was looming around her. So she had consented to be a part of my body painting practice. I had interviewed her. I asked her questions about her body, her experience with her cancer diagnosis, and what mattered to her now. And she explained that with such an honesty that I've never seen before. She didn't want me to make her beautiful with the painting. What she asked me to do was to bear witness to the fact of what she has endured, and that she was still here. And that really stayed with me. I also interviewed her oncologist because I felt that it was important for me to understand the medical side of what she was dealing with. Her oncologist and I looked at her scans. I got to see what was going on inside of her. I also reviewed anatomical texts so that I can understand what was happening inside her abdomen. And the one thing that I found so interesting visually in looking at this is that the vessels in her abdomen reminded me of a butterfly. The wings of the butterfly, the webbing looked like blood vessels. And the craziest thing of it all is when I interviewed G, she had told me that she loved butterflies and she loved the color blue. So I rendered this butterfly emerging from her abdomen. It was important for me to be intentional about what I rendered on her body. I didn't want her to feel like anything less than whole. She had some organs removed from her body, so I didn't want to show it like she was missing parts of herself. So instead, the butterfly became a symbol for the surgeries that she had. I had removed the bottom two wings. That butterfly is still beautiful, it can still fly, and it is still whole. I remember at the end of painting G, it had taken about 5 hours. She had gotten up, I walked her to the mirror, and she looked at herself, and she told me, "Isn't it amazing to see a butterfly instead of a mass?" I'm never going to forget that moment. And so I think about her all the time. And I wish that she could be here to see me in medical school. I remember that the time that she passed was a few months before I got my medical school acceptance. I wish that I could have told her that I had gotten into Frank H. Netter MD School of Medicine. She was there with me the entire time that I was applying for schools, and even when she was admitted into the hospital and was really sick, she would always remind me that I was going to be a great doctor. And the most incredible part of it all is that I didn't imagine myself being here. But there was a plan in place, and I ended up at the place that was named after Frank H. Netter. Every time I would paint someone, I would have a Netter atlas, an anatomical atlas, by my side, looking at it. That was my artistic inspiration. And I'm at the school named after him. How incredible. So now that I'm in medical school, every week we have something called Weekly Case. We're in a small seminar room with a group of students, and we don't know what the case is going to be until we go through it, and at the end, we figure it out. There was one case a few months into my first year of med school, and it was on colon cancer. I remember sitting there and thinking of G the entire time. And when I went home that day, I realized that I was wearing a blue shirt that had blue butterflies on it. I'm not kidding. There was no way I could have planned this at all, because I probably was running late that morning and just threw on whatever shirt that I had. And so to me, I felt that it was G telling me that she was proud of me. Do you remember that canvas that I was painting in the beginning of my speech? Who told me that she thought that I was a makeup artist for the organs? That was G. She called me that. And this entire time, I've talked about the importance of a paintbrush. But what I haven't talked about is the importance of a palette. And every time that I paint someone, I use a disposable palette, and I typically throw it away. But there's one palette that I kept, and I brought it here with me today. This is the palette that I used to paint on G. I accidentally saved it. I think at the end of the session, I just folded it up and put it in my makeup bag, and I found it months later. So then when she passed, I had framed it. You can see all the colors of that day. Most importantly, you can see the blue from the butterfly. And in doing this practice of anatomical body painting for all these years, I learned that medicine isn't just about treating disease. It's about seeing people fully. Because there's a G in every waiting room, and if we just see the diagnosis, we miss the person behind it. I am an artist, I am a medical student, but those two sides of me are coming together to one day be a physician who will see and carry people's stories with compassion and trust. And it's important for me that I will see people fully, whole, themselves, from the inside out. Thank you.